Good afternoon. This is Alex Bartholomew, CEO of People Stretch Solutions. We've got a great program today on OKRs and how to build momentum going into 2021. It's 12 o'clock. We normally give everyone 2 more minutes to start. So we will be back in 2 minutes for an exciting 40 minutes of OKR learning. Thank you. Alrighty, we're gonna get going. So for those of you who just joined, Alex Bartholomew, CEO of People Stretch Solutions. We are a management consulting firm focused on OKR consulting, sales effectiveness, and leadership development. We're based in the DC area, and we work with small and mid-sized companies across North America and Europe. So for today, I'm also joined by Truett Dill. He's my producer, and he's going to be helping me answer your questions. So today's format is we're hopefully going to get some of you to join us in sharing. So we've got a couple exercises. We're going to hopefully get some crowd or audience participation. Throughout what we talk about, you've got an ability to ask a question, so bring them early and often. Because we want you to hopefully leave with a lot more knowledge about how you can use OKRs in 2021 to build momentum. So let's dig in. So we've all been through quite the year, and going into December, we're all feeling like, okay, 2021 will be better. But when will it be better? When will we get back to the office? When will things get back to normal? There's a lot of things we still don't know. But what is important is the companies that are going to be proactive about thinking about their strategy and what they have to do to execute in 2021 are going to be the ones that hit the growth curve harder, faster, and do a lot better than the balance of the competition. So traditionally, in this time of year, many leaders of companies would think about that chasm between strategy and execution. And for a variety of reasons, that chasm might be wide. There can certainly be instances when there's distractions. We've had a lot of them this year, and luckily they're behind us. In some cases, the distance that we've had to deal with has created misalignment, and not intentional. When you don't have the water cooler time, when you don't have the extra time to make sure your alignment, you start getting out of alignment. So that's an important dynamic that companies are facing. And then the fatigue that's been brought on by working virtually. Most companies and most employees have adjusted, but they're feeling it. And so that has contributed to a lot of companies really starting to struggle with accountability. So what is an organization to do in 2021? Well, we're going to look backwards, and we're just going to give you a quick stroll down history lane around OKRs. They were invented by Andy Grove at Intel. He was the CEO for much of the 80s and 90s. And his goal for OKRs was he wanted his leaders every quarter to set objectives, not just numbers, but articulate their goals in the form of an objective, and then set very aggressive yet realistic goals. And he called those key results. That's where OKRs come from. At the time, MBOs were very popular, but the big issue that Andy Grove found with MBOs is that they were very antiseptic. And so he wanted his leaders to practice articulating what the goal was. And he wanted them to practice and really try to bring inspiration, not just aggressive numbers. He knew his team needed to engage their teams, and they had to practice to doing that. And so he came up with OKRs, but a lot of people are like, well, how have OKRs spread? Well, a gentleman by the name of John Doerr worked with Andy Grove, but his future wasn't at Intel. He moved on to Kleiner Perkins to be a venture capitalist, and he introduced OKRs to Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and the rest is history. And Doerr talks about in his book, Measure What Matters, how the Googlers really harnessed the power of OKRs and really spread the popularity all throughout Silicon Valley and subsequently around the world. And that's where we find ourselves today, with OKRs at its kind of highest peak yet of popularity. And it's a tool that more and more companies, whether you're a startup, a small business, an association, an enterprise, OKR works for any organization thanks to its flexibility. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But let me just hit a great example of an OKR from the Google days. And this goes back to 2008. So first opportunity for audience participation. Put in your question, does anybody know who the leading internet browser was back in 2008? So please put that in to the questions if you want to venture a guess, and then I'll give you the answer here in a minute. But Sundar Pichai, who you might recognize as the current CEO, back in 2008, he was a product manager, and his job was to build the best browser. He was going up against an 800-pound gorilla. Truett, do we have any answers yet?
Nope, no answers yet.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to give you the answer if you don't want to venture a guess. It's Internet Explorer. Microsoft got into it. Oh, I think someone chimed in. Netscape. Oh, Paul, thank you for that one. So Netscape actually got it the fair way, people natural downloads, but because Microsoft bundled everything, they had more downloads than Netscape. So from that perspective, Google set one of their most talented individuals, and for 12 consecutive quarters worked at trying to beat Microsoft Internet Explorer. And he was able to do it, but 12 quarters later. And you can see the numbers of how each year Sundar actually had to increase the number of users and downloads. And he still didn't get it finally until the third year. So I know that a lot of times it can be easy to dismiss something because it's Google, but just think about at your organization. If you put your best and brightest, what you might and what your organization might be able to accomplish in 12 quarters. So that's the important takeaway, is that if you have something that is through focus and inspiration, what can you accomplish at your company? So we're going to do an exercise. And
Alex, we actually have a question real quick. It's how did they know they were on track for the first 2 years if they weren't meeting their key results?
Okay, that's a great question, and one that I've gotten before. So as you look at the results, Google, being as aspirational as they are, they went from nothing to something, and certainly they were 50% of goal, but at 10 million downloads they became relevant, and then at 37 million downloads, I think that put them in the top 5, if not the top 3. So they had a general sense of the marketplace, and that's how they were able to continue and not say, hey, you know what, we're never going to catch up. And I think the important thing, and I think historically, Sundar Pichai credits, when they doubled down in 2010, that they had been investing and they saw that curve, because their biggest growth, they went from 37 million to 111 million downloads. So that was pretty volumetric, but that was a function of just working at it and working at it. There's a lot of entrepreneurs who've seen their business grow volumetrically, not overnight, but through hard work, and they finally hit that curve. So OKRs is not always linear, but if you stick with it, you can can get that exponential curve. So the exercise for the people that are with us today is we're going to take 3 minutes, quick exercise, 3 minutes. And I'm going to ask you, think about your company, and if you could only focus on one objective for the first quarter of 2021. Once again, don't think about this from your role. Think about this, if you're not the CEO, think about it as the CEO. What is the one objective you would focus on for 2021 first quarter? So I wanted you to write that down and think about how you're going to measure success. And then we're going to ask the question, how does this objective inspire your team? So you've got 3 minutes. It's 12:10. I'm going to come back at 12:13. And hopefully we're going to get a couple people who will raise their hand to share an objective that they have. Okay, so ask everyone that's here to please write down that objective, first quarter 2021. We'll be back in 3 minutes, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from some of you in terms of what you think your top objective is in the first quarter 2021. Hopefully no questions, Truett?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, great. So Paul Cohen, no pressure. I'm expecting big things from you. Okay, Melissa Powell, thank you for sharing. We've got one. You guys have 2 more minutes. Okay, as people finish up, True, can we unmute Melissa? Melissa, can we get you on live?
Yes, I can do that. It's not letting me unmute her.
Okay.
I sent a request.
I got it. I'm unmuted.
Awesome.
Melissa, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
So can I ask you a couple questions about what you submitted?
Sure.
So one of the things about the objective is you kind of mentioned a few things. So evaluate current resources to determine what adjustments are needed to support the business and improve employee experience. So is when you talk about supporting the business, how are you defining success in supporting the business? Growth, client retention, what?
I think both actually, but we've got some new lines of business as a result of 2020, and so I think that we've just been handling that as it's come in. So evaluating that, making sure that we can maintain that business going forward, and what do we need to support that, since 2021 is a new year for everyone in multiple ways.
Absolutely. So I think the evaluating new lines of business, that's an objective unto itself. And making that successful. Okay,
Right.
so now I'm going to make you pick. What's more important, improve employee experience or making those new lines sustainable for 2021? You can only pick one.
Employee experience, 100%. I'll never not pick it first.
That's great. That's great. And I think that's wonderful. So think about how are you going to measure success for your improving employee experience?
Client retention.
Okay, that's one. But what's in it for them? I understand client retention is good for the company, but what's in it for them from an improve employee experience?
Well, that one's tricky. So client retention is necessary in order to keep employees. So there's that part, because you need the revenue to be able to keep your employees. And I mean, they need to have clients to serve, first of all. So they're tied together. Whether or not that really improves employee experience, I wouldn't say so. But that's why I said evaluate resources, because I don't know that we have people in the right roles necessarily due to kind of the chaotic feel of 2021.
Completely understand. So now we've gone from 2 objectives.
I know you're gonna have 10 objectives before we finish this conversation.
Right. So, but Melissa, you're doing great, and I really appreciate you putting yourself out there, because this is the beginning of the how to work within objectives. Like right now, companies are starting to try to write objectives for 2021. Whether it's their first time or we have clients now that it's their 8th, 10th, 12th quarter. And you know what? They still have these challenges because everyone is trying to grow and there's these competing interests.
Right. And if you're not having to do this over and over again, your business is probably not doing well.
Well, there's a variety of reasons, but I think what's important here, so if we just go back to improve employee experience, let's just say, yes, you can work on 3 objectives. Let's just focus on improving employee experience. What's going to make everyone motivated or inspired to improve employee experience? How can we dress that up a little? Because improve employee experience, once again, it's good for the company, it's good for the leaders, but what about the frontline people? How do we get inspired? How does everyone get inspired about making your place of work a great place to work?
I would say consistent recognition is important for employee experience.
Great. What else?
Let's see. I don't know, just support in general. I mean, I'm an employee, so I'm one of your people that is not a CEO of a company. So
that's good.
Consistent support and listening. I mean, I know these aren't really measurable things, but as an employee,
hold on. Yeah. You're doing a great job. So if you improve employee experience by recognition, improving listening, and you said one more thing, support?
Yeah, support, just just even from a conversational standpoint of being availability, checking in, recognition, all of those things I think for employee experience are important.
Yes. So those are all good examples of how we just stitch together an objective. And we're when you say those things and you say them over and over and over, and then you measure your progress against them, you can actually measure progress against a lot of the things. Now, some of it might be survey based. So a lot of times improving the employee experience, people can ask questions around listening, questions around support, questions around recognition. I mean, there's net promoter score for clients, there's employee net promoter score for internal. So there's ways to measure that. You just have to set it up and ask the question consistently. And And we've, I've always wanted to do this in one of our webinars. It's one thing for me just to share it with you, but to have a live example that those things matter. Everything that you just said matters. And what's great about OKRs is if you work together as a team, you can organize them in a manner that gets everybody excited and helps you focus.
Yeah.
Great. So Melissa, thank you so much. Do I have another volunteer who would like to put themselves out there like Melissa did? Okay, Truett, do we have anyone else? Paul Cohen?
Paul, maybe?
Paul, can we unmute Paul? You're not going to get off the hook, my friend. You're as much of an expert in as I am. I'd love to hear from you. So Paul said experience-led differentiation, and I'd love him to expound a little on this objective because Paul comes to us from a large company, Juniper Networks, and he's got some amazing experiences I'm hoping he will share with us.
Paul, you're unmuted now, by the way.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Paul, thank you so much.
All right, so yeah, just a bit of perspective, Juniper Networks, we have roughly 10,000 employees that are working on OKRs, and we actually, as of this morning, we have 591 teams that have set and are executing against OKRs in the current quarter. So we are already getting ready from a company standpoint of setting our 2021 OKRs, and we have to make them super special because it's going to be our 25th anniversary as a company. So we got to be super aspirational. So yeah, so what I mean by the objective I listed there is there's a bunch of components to that. So it's really a focus on the customer and thinking from the customer's perspective. So as opposed to typically a company will think about themselves and how they project onto the customers, and we want to pretend we're the customer. So kind of the main components of that are kind of the ease of doing business with Juniper, right? So what's that interaction? All those different touch points. We're also pulling out a focus on quality around where we have both hardware, software, services, and then all the processes around how we do that. Then also, from the customer experience, when they receive our products or services, what does that day 1, 0, 2 on look like, and how frictionless can we make that? And then lastly, it's around making big bets. So around technology, where are we investing in the next era of networking? And then also company pivots. So what can we lead with in terms of how we run the company so that we can attract and maintain the most talented workforce, right? So creating that stickiness. So you can see there's a whole bunch of that. And then we came up with this new term of this kind of all ties back into an Uber kind of almost on North Star of how do we run the business versus grow the business, and how do you, the word that came up was alchemy. So it's super hard to figure it out, but that's what we're going to kind of use our company 2021 objectives to kind of steer us in that direction so that we continue to make those bets going forward, but we still got to, run the business at the same time.
So that's great, and I think it's great to get a snapshot from a large organization like Juniper. I'd love it if the challenge was to get you to distill an experience-led differentiation. If you added a few more words to that, what would it be to maybe make it to have maybe the newer employees at Juniper understand what the intent of the objective is? Because that's still a little ambiguous.
So I think, yes, I think obviously it's from that customer perspective. All those things that we listed, what we do with our objectives is we actually put a full description behind what it means, because we actually, our CEO does a challenge. This will be going into our full second year of using OKRs. And unfortunately, yes, we're in this COVID situation, but he does pop quizzes in the elevators when he, not only in our Sunnyvale headquarters, but when he travels around the world and kind of says, so this year we have 4 objectives. So it's kind of like, hey, what are our 4 objectives? Or so I think we do a really good job of communicating, and we just did what we call and we do it twice a year, a voice survey. It has about 40 questions about how the company is and people's feelings. And actually 98% of the people understood how the work that they do actually ties back to the company strategy. So that's like a long-winded answer to say, we're trying to keep the words short in the objectives so they're memorable, but
Yes.
at the end of the day, we're doing all that education underneath the hood to make sure that people truly understand where we're going.
And that's awesome. And that's where I was hoping you would share the context, because unless you have that additional description, going with shorter objectives can be tricky. But Paul is the OKR lead for the entire company, and his job is to make sure that, OKRs are successful at Juniper. So Paul, thank you so much for your anecdote. That was incredibly valuable. So
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you to Michelle. Thank you to Paul. I'm excited that we were able to get other people talking. So for those of you online, let's dive into maybe a little bit more depth about how to leverage OKRs and building momentum for 2021. So the system itself goes quarter to quarter. And especially if maybe you're smaller to mid-size, a lot of organizations like setting their objectives every quarter. Some organizations this time of year will set annual objectives and then break it down quarterly. Others will just go quarter to quarter. So you can do that a couple ways. But there's 3 fundamental parts to an OKR cycle: the strategic planning, the execution, and the retrospective. Now, there are some important nuances that I want to call out. OKR favors organizations that are agile. And if you're not an organization that is agile or nimble, it will help you become more nimble, because it expects you to be able to execute strategic planning in a short window every quarter. So that's very powerful. And to be able to do that, especially coming out of a year that's COVID, when maybe you didn't do as much strategic planning, makes a huge difference. Then you go into execution mode. And one of the things that we've seen in execution mode, and we'll talk about this here shortly in the next slide, is that by being able to focus every week on the things that matter the most through your OKRs, it tends to drive goal attainment or OKR attainment at a much higher level. So frequency is a key to success in using these and getting and establishing momentum in 2021. And then the final thing is the concept of a retrospective. So we have a couple of tech companies on here, and they're used to experiencing a retrospective in the agile software methodology of looking back over the period and learning. In OKRs, that's the intent, to look at the entire quarter and to really ask yourselves, okay, let's celebrate what we won, and let's learn from where we fell short. And so those are the 3 parts of OKRs that really, if you're thinking about doing OKRs in 2021, you're going to need to understand that you're going to do this every quarter. Now, one of the reasons why a lot of people, especially CEOs, are fans of OKRs is the ability that it brings together probably no better tool to get high alignment, high accountability. And the reason that is in the OKR cycle, in the 3 different parts, you have strategic planning. And one of the key nuances here is, thanks to the number of teams that are involved, you're getting more people involved. And by having more people involved, you're going to have more conversations. And as you work up in this graph, you start seeing the more teams and the more conversations you get, the higher alignment and accountability you get. So you graduate from strategic planning into execution. And this concept of frequency becomes very powerful, especially in terms of how you manage team reviews and one-on-ones. So when you look at this, some organizations, because of COVID, scaled back meetings. And I understand why, because there was meeting fatigue. I get it. But for 2021, we have to dig in, and we have an opportunity to consider increasing the frequency of meetings. Now, that doesn't mean you might want to take a bi-weekly or a 1-hour meeting twice a month. You might break that up into 30 minutes weekly. But increasing frequency in an OKR context is a major component of what drives momentum. So something I want to make sure everybody's clear. And then in the retrospective, every quarter, you're actually tracking your number of wins and what the number of things that you actually learn from the quarter. When an organization becomes that intentional about their wins and what they're learning, every quarter you get better and better and better. And so the Google example had someone very focused, maniacally even, over 8 quarters to really understand, okay, what is it going to take to beat Internet Explorer? And they finally got there, but it wasn't without following this that drives focus, and it really forces us to ask ourselves hard questions at the end of the quarter to say, okay, what did we learn? So as we're going through this, one of the things that I talked about is this notion in strategic planning, the notion of cascading and more conversations. So Paul talked about almost 600 teams, over 10,000 employees at Juniper Networks are engaging in a variation of this. But think of all those conversations that are happening in order to get aligned and to set objectives for the quarter. So this is a big opportunity in your organization, should you consider using OKRs to just drive more conversations and try to drive those conversations all the way to the frontline employee and then bring it back up. So I've got a story of a former client that was using OKRs, and I think it's a great story because the CEO wanted to really surprise and delight their customers with industry-leading service. Now, they were an IT help desk, and this IT help desk had over 50 people at any given time working the desk. And one of the challenges they face is they get angry callers because their computer's not working, their peripherals aren't working, something's not working, and they're calling them, and they better fix it in lickety-split, no time flat. And so that's a challenging environment to work. So oftentimes, in order to pacify angry customers, the frontline worker would give a credit. And so it was costing the company tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars every year because it was a tactic to pacify. But the goal was, hey, how do we do better? And so the SVP of Ops was focused on customer service. We talked about a Net Promoter Score. The call center manager was focused on the customer experience and reducing average call wait time. But this frontline worker came up and said, you know what, I'm going to surprise and delight customers daily. Asked his manager for a discretionary budget. And that budget for the quarter was a couple $1,000s. And in that budget, what that person did is he would send a small gift, whether it's a thumb drive, neck pillow, mouse pad, to that person as just an apology. Hey, we're sorry you had an inconvenience. Thank you for being patient. Here's a thank you for being our client. And thanks to that level of thinking, this person ultimately saved in that quarter almost like $6,000 or $7,000. So it was a tremendous ROI that was soon rolled out across the team. And all of a sudden, the company was saving tens of thousands of dollars, not because the CEO had a great idea, but because the frontline person had a great idea. So you might not view your business as an IT help desk, but there is creative genius in the front line of your business. How are you unlocking it? So we're getting into execution mode. This is another important part that drives momentum when you're using OKRs. So one of the things that we talked about is how are you aligning or choreographing what you cover in team reviews versus what you cover in your one-on-ones. And so that's a powerful dynamic. And frankly, we saw it across all of our clients suffer for the less meetings, less time together. And so that dynamic hurts an organization and its ability to drive momentum. So now frequency isn't the silver bullet, it helps, but there needs to be some smart choreography with leaders, and OKRs gives you sort of your scoreboard, and it helps you make good decisions about what to surface on the team review side versus the one-on-one side. And so as a leader, you can make good decisions about having more high impact team reviews and also having high impact one-on-ones. So this brings me to one of the most important outcomes of OKRs is managers embracing the opportunity to master the weekly check-in. And if you master the weekly check-in, it means that you're committed to having better conversations, you're committed to feedback, and you're committed to leveraging opportunities to give recognition. Melissa talked to us about how a lot of these are really important. And so in OKRs, I couldn't have asked for a better endorsement of what people want. And OKRs in one-on-ones gives people the ability to have more meaningful conversations, to nurture good two-way feedback. And ultimately, what a lot of people don't realize is the power of recognition in a one-on-one basis. A lot of times people think recognition is about recognizing in front of a whole group. Mostly, people who are introverted don't like recognition in big groups, but they do like recognition in a one-on-one basis. So you have an opportunity to think, hey, if I want to create momentum in 2021, how can I adopt a framework that's going to force me as a manager or leader to pay close attention to how people are doing so I can become better at engaging with them? So that's the opportunity that I think many of you have in engaging with OKRs and leveraging for 2021. Last couple of slides before we open up for questions. I talked a little bit about the retrospective. A lot of growth companies talk about growth and pushing and stretching. If you want a culture of stretch, you have to create a safe culture. People need to feel like they can fail. And a lot of times, depending on what goal framework you use, how you use compensation to motivate, people don't have an incentive to make big bets. And so it's important that if you're going to adopt OKR or something similar and you're going to do retrospectives, that you as a leader, whether you're the CEO or you manage a team, as a leader, how do you help contribute to a safe working environment that allows people to put themselves out there, to really try to drive growth, and to go after something as audacious as maybe beating the category 800-pound gorilla? So that's something I want you all to think about. A lot of times we've gotten questions on, well, what are good retrospective questions? And I've got this on the board just to share with some of you, because I think as you go through a retrospective, we want to celebrate wins, but I think sometimes we also have to learn, did we have the right objective? Were the key results too high, too low? How well were we organized? What are we ready to change? So these are the types of questions that organizations generally bring to a retrospective in order to raise the rigor and really execute at a higher level. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Also want to leave my key takeaways. Truett, do we have any pending questions for the group on what we've covered?
Yes, we do. My team already engages in weekly one-on-ones and team reviews. What is the value of OKR?
Okay, that's a great question. So you've got frequency right. So how is their engagement? Generally, the OKR, what it drives is transparency. So how transparent is the team's performance with one another? We see in a lot of companies, it's not as transparent as it could or should be. And then in your one-on-ones, how, if people aren't performing, how direct are the conversations that need to be having around performance? We find that even when companies meet frequently, which is good, the content of those meetings isn't changed in a manner to maintain high engagement on both sides. So that's generally the value that OKR brings. You're not going to talk about, let's say if someone has 3 OKRs, the same 3 OKRs in the team meeting and the one-on-one. But you're going to focus on topically things that impact people's OKRs in the team meeting, and then you're going to have a more in-depth conversation in the one-on-one. So hopefully we answered that question, Truett.
Yeah, that's actually it right now, though. Don't know
Okay,
if
great.
anyone has
So
any more.
we're going to wrap up just because we always like keeping our webinars to about 40 minutes. Key takeaways. Think about the role of inspiration and how you can infuse it into whether you're going to do OKRs or not. Inspiration is a powerful element that I think every company needs for 2021. It's been a rough year, but you've persevered, and now there's hope. And I think we need to bring some inspiration in order to set the new year up. I think if you're contemplating OKRs, whether you've begun the journey or you're thinking about the journey, the upside is alignment and accountability, but it's not without its challenges. You know, we're very biased. We think OKRs builds winning teams. You know, a team to win and win consistently needs rigor. Oftentimes, I'm not a New England Patriots fan, but I do admire Bill Belichick and the rigor that he's brought to that organization and how they've been able to win, for example. And then lastly, whether you work with OKRs or not as a leader, which I think everyone is on our webinar today, how are you mastering the weekly check-in? How are you making sure that it's not turning into just a status update? I think our people are our most important asset, and how are we raising the bar in order for them to have the best day, week, month, year possible? So with that, Truett, any final questions before we sign off?
Nope.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone. You've got my email up there. If you'd like a copy of the deck, happy to share. Just drop us an email. You'll probably also get a follow-up email. Would love your feedback. Wish everyone a safe and prosperous December and a great 2021. Take care and thank you very much.